Welcome to Championship Weekend in college football and the Friday edition of HQ Spotlight. Jeremy St. Louis alongside Mike Cunio. Happy to have you joining us. We've got 3 title games in the G5 ranks tonight, and then the massive Big Ten title game tomorrow evening.
And that game takes us to Indy right now. We're not going to wait till tomorrow. Let's hook up with our crew, Kanell, Damien Harris. Hustle, the appropriate term to get these guys on TV today. Guys, take us into what these players are feeling. We're 24 hours out from the biggest game of the season for them. What do you think's going through their mind in this new playoff format? But first, you got to take care of business. Championship weekend. Damien, start with you.
Damien will be able to speak to this way more than I can because I played in an era where we didn't do conference championship games. But I would equivocate.
Was that long ago?
Hey, I mean, it wasn't. Come on. But it was. But like playing in those massive stages where there were championship implications. But what I think is very unique about this is Penn State has been in this conference for a long time. Oregon year 1, they're the only unblemished team, 0 losses in the loss column. They would love to try to make history first year in the conference, knock this thing out. I'm sure there's nerves, there's adrenaline, all those emotions right now, last minute prep, getting ready for a team meal tonight for both these teams. You're just trying to keep calm, and then the wait tomorrow for an 8 o'clock kickoff. Most players don't like it. We love it because we get to watch it in prime time, but those nerves are going to be the most important things to manage for the players.
Yeah, you definitely have to keep a clear mind when you have to wait that long, especially because what's important about this, and regardless if we're talking about the 12-team playoff or a new system, this is still an opportunity to become a champion. And whenever we talk about setting a championship standard as a program, that's something that Penn State is looking to do. Obviously, they haven't been able to get it done, but it starts with coming out on top of your conference. And with a newcomer in Oregon who has had such a spectacular showing in their first year in the Big Ten, it's going to be a huge challenge to see if they can do it.
Guys, a lot of talk about James Franklin and the fact that he is 0-11 versus AP top 5 teams when his team is ranked. We know what this win would do for Penn State as a program, but Damien, what would this win do for that man, James Franklin?
Well, it would do everything. It would rewrite all the narratives because, again, at a conference championship, if you can right that ship, if you can get one win in that win column, even though you're facing 11 in your last 11 games and losses, if you can get a win today, that's going to be huge. It's going to change the narrative, and it's going to change how we see this Penn State team. A lot of times this year we've been talking about, yes, they've played well enough, but they just haven't overcome the hump that they need to, that James Franklin needs to. So to beat the #1 team, one of the only unbeaten teams remaining in the country, to get a win in this Big Ten championship game, I mean, I couldn't think of anything bigger for James Franklin at this moment.
I think that narrative is unfair for James Franklin. I get it. I do, because here's my point. In those games against top 5 opponents, I bet most of them he was the underdog, which means like those other teams, and most of them are against Michigan and Ohio State, they have better rosters than his. But that's where you have to show your worth as a coach that's making $9 million a year, is to overcome that lack of talent and get it done on the big stage. But in order to do it, and trust me, he knows the criticism, he knows the record. The only way to quiet the critics is to get it done and win the game.
Yeah, you just got to win. It's as simple as that.
All right, Danny, let's flip the script here and go to Oregon and Dan Lanning. I think if I squint my eyes real tight, I think I see Dan Campbell sometimes. That's the kind of vibes I get with the way he likes to coach. What would a win do for him? We already know he's in the upper echelon of coaches in college football, but what does a win here, what does that do for his resume?
Oh, it would be ginormous for him. I think he's one of these young, up-and-coming names who's been coming through the pipeline, spending time at the premier Blue Bloods in the SEC. Then he goes out and gets this great job, and I think a lot of people wondered what type of fit it would be, and he has absolutely crushed it. He already got some of his demons out of his system by beating Washington last week in a big performance. That was one of the teams that was his bugaboo last year, but he's been phenomenal. I think it would really kind of christen him as one of the top 5 coaches in college football. And then if he does carry that on a Big Ten championship game, a #1 seed in the playoff as the favorite to win the national championship, that would squarely cement him as one of the best coaches in college football. He's on that trajectory. He's been awesome. He's a great motivator. He's a great mind. It would just kind of christen him and solidify him as one of the best coaches in the game.
All right, well, let's break down some positions here then, starting with the quarterback position. Danny, obviously we'll come to you here. Drew Aller versus Dillon Gabriel, both capable quarterbacks to upper echelon quarterbacks that have very good offenses. Who do you give the edge to in this quarterback matchup?
I think it's easy, Jeremy. I think it's Dillon Gabriel. And, I think Drew Aller has been good, but he's going to have to be great in this game if they want to win it. And in the biggest moments of the season, I think back to Illinois, a top 25 game. I think back to the loss against Ohio State. He's kind of not frozen, but he hasn't risen to the occasion. He's going to have to rise to the occasion. And Dillon Gabriel has been somebody who's one of the most trustworthy quarterbacks in the game. You know exactly what you're going to get. He's one of the most prolific passers we've seen in the history of college football. He's been on these big stages. He's not going to make the big mistakes. So I think there's a pretty clear-cut advantage. He also has better weapons around him, too, which is something that always has to be considered when you're talking about a quarterback. But I trust Dillon Gabriel, and I give them the edge for sure. The Oregon Ducks have the edge at quarterback.
Let's not forget, Dillon Gabriel's having all that success because he's been in college football almost longer than anybody else. Let's note that too.
Damien, let's go to the running backs. Nick Singleton, Katron Allen for Penn State. Is 2 better than 1 in this situation for Jordan James from the Oregon Ducks?
Well, usually you would say yes, but I think the 2 backs for Penn State just haven't played quite well enough. Jordan James at Oregon has been phenomenal all season long. He's quick, he's fast, he's explosive, he can make the big home run plays, and he can get you those guaranteed yards even for being a smaller style back. And when I look at this Penn State offense, there's been a couple games where Tyler Warren has been the leading rusher. So I would have to go with Jordan James in this Oregon offense, or this Oregon running back room, as being, you know, the better position between the 2 teams. And I think that it's going to be an interesting matchup because Penn State has a top 10 total defense and a top 5 rush defense. So Jordan James and Oregon are going to have their hands full, but he's going to have to have a big game to keep all the pressure off of Dillon Gabriel and not make Oregon one-dimensional.
I think these are comparing like very similar backs. They're all great. They've all played really well this season. I'll give a slight edge to Jordan James. I just feel like he might be one of the more underrated, unsung heroes of college football. And in the back end of the season, really once they got past that Ohio State game, it feels like they've been relying on him more and just kind of not wanting to show a lot, not wanting to risk Dillon Gabriel in the run game as well. So I'd give the slight edge to Jordan James. Again, his offensive line, one of the better offensive line in the country,
definitely.
that always helps as well. But I think the Oregon Ducks, again, have the edge here.
Danny, would you be surprised if James Franklin was to perhaps throw in a wrinkle here? Because we've had a lot of talk about Tyler Warren and the significant role that he's played in this offense, and the fact that these running backs have not necessarily been able to get going. But would you be surprised if James Franklin maybe leaned on the run a little bit more here to try to control the tempo of this game?
I wouldn't be surprised at all, Jerry. I mean, you mentioned like a wrinkle that they could show. Bro Pribula, their backup quarterback, has played a lot, much like we saw Arch Manning come in for Texas last week against Texas A&M, had a rushing touchdown. They've been sprinkling him in all year. And, of course, he came in and played in the Wisconsin game when Drew Aller was hurt. He's more than adequate as a passer, so you might be able to wrinkle in some sort of wildcat, like almost quarterback play action where he acts like he's going to run some sort of quarterback draw or quarterback sweep and then pulls it up and throws it over the top. I think that could be the wrinkle. The one thing Andy Koltnicki, you have to give him a ton of credit for, the innovation. Like, he has lined up Tyler Warren all over the place to try to get him matched up where he's not going to get pressed along the line of scrimmage against a big defensive end, where he's going to get the ball in space. I can't wait to see what he does with that player. And also, remember against Ohio State, it didn't work. Remember he did like the wild formation where you put a couple of the offensive linemen over to the left and you leave one right here in front of you and you split them out wide. He just comes up with things, almost looks like he's a mad scientist drawing plays up in the dirt. I think he's going to have to do that to generate plays against this Oregon defense, which is pretty underrated.
Damien, I want to ask you about the CFP implications here in terms of seeding. Obviously, we think both teams are going to stay in the top 12 here. But for Penn State, beating the #1 team, sitting at 3, do they move up all the way to 1 if they somehow pull off this upset?
Well, I guess we're going to have to see what happens in Atlanta between Texas and Georgia, because if Texas wins that game, then I think they should be the clear-cut #1. But if they lose and Penn State happens to win, then there's a possibility that they could jump. But I think the biggest thing, the most interesting thing about these conference championships this weekend is how is the committee going to treat conference champion losers? I mean, I know we're talking about who's going to win these matchups, but how are they going to drop the losers of these conference championship games? How far are they going to drop? You know, what's the movement going to be? It's going to be a lot of things to watch for in a new expanded college football playoff world going into a first championship weekend where we don't really know what the stakes mean anymore.
I think it all depends on how the games look. That's one thing, we put all these hypotheticals together and we talk about where will a team drop, where will they fall, will an SMU get in if they lose to Clemson. Give me the score. Like, give me the outcome of the game. How close was it when you watch the game? Like, if Texas boat races Georgia, they're the number 1 team.
Absolutely.
If Penn State boat races Oregon, they might be the number 1 team. If they both do, I think it'd probably go to Texas. That would get the edge. But, like, let's see what the scores are. And that's one of the things that's the advantage of having the committee. They are watching all these games together this weekend in Dallas, since it's the last weekend and they have to make that decision on Sunday. Let's wait and see how they play out, because I do think that eye test and that recency, how do you look right before they go in that room to make the selection, matters a ton.
And I think one last thing that does also matter, and we've even talked about it on the show, is the preseason expectations.
Yeah.
Because, again, Texas was looked at as a national championship favorite for a lot of people. So, again, comparing if Texas were to win in a convincing fashion and Penn State were also to win in convincing fashion, I think the expectation was for Texas to be here before Penn State, so then they should be the number 1 team.
Final college football playoff rankings set to be released at noon Eastern time on Sunday after we get through championship Saturday. So with that, let's talk about a pick for this game. Oregon favored in this game by 3.5 points, so the line is tight. DK, what are you thinking in terms of a winner for this game?
Jeremy, I wanted him to go first. I wanted to hear where he was going.
You want me to go first? I'll go first if you want me to.
All right,
I'll go
ahead.
first. All right, I'm going to make it simple. I'm going to go with the team where I trust their head coach the most, where I trust their quarterback the most, and where I trust their run game the most. And right now, that is Oregon.
So you think they cover?
I think Oregon covers.
All right, I'm going to go with Penn State, Jeremy. I think Penn State covers the number. I wouldn't be shocked if they won. We talked about what it means for James Franklin. There's something about that backs against the wall mentality. They just haven't had this big of a win. Oregon's kind of playing with house money, too. They're the number 1 seed. They don't feel that much stress, like they've got to win this game. I feel like it means something more to Penn State. My favorite play in the game, though, is the under 50.5. I think these defenses are going to shine. Abdul Carter is one of the best defensive edge pass rushers in the entire country. Their linebackers are really stout. I think they'll be able to control Jordan James. They've got to tackle well and make sure they disrupt Dylan Gabriel. So under is my favorite play, but I do like Penn State with a 3.5.
Okay, so based on your record this season, Danny, I'm going with the over, okay, for this game. So,
well, listen, Jeremy, I'm taking the under too. So you can side with me at least. You don't have to side with DK. You can side with me. I'm taking the under as well.
Danny Kanell and Damien Harris
Cheap
on
shot.
site for us at the Big Ten title game in Indianapolis. It's gonna be a good one. Saturday night from Lucas Oil Stadium. They're getting ready for Fan Fest. That's where they are right now. And of course, we're going to have pregame coverage here on CBS Sports HQ. The game itself kicking off on CBS and Paramount Plus at 8 Eastern Time.